Time now for an exclusive interview with Fed Governor Waller, Christopher Waller. Let's get to Steve Leisman. Great time for this, Steve, in light of everything, I guess.
Yeah, in light of everything is a good way to put it, Joe. Thanks very much. We're here in Washington with Fed Governor Chris Waller. Governor Waller, thanks for joining us this morning.
Well, thanks, Steve. Great to be back.
Well, let's talk about the idea of the main stories out there, which is the higher oil price. And you were a couple weeks ago not that concerned. Has your views changed given what's happened with the Strait of Hormuz and what's happening in the war in Iran?
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago when the jobs report came out and it was, negative 92,000, I thought, that's it. I'm dissenting. I'm supporting a rate cut. Because at that time, exactly, it looked to me like this was going to be a very short-lived spike in oil, no inflation issues, looked through it. Since that time, the Strait of Hormuz was closed. This is looking like it's going to be a much more protracted conflict, and oil prices are going to stay high for a longer time. So that suggested inflation was more of a concern than I was putting it. The second piece of information that came out, and Chair Powell talked about this a bit on the press conference, was that we've seen a lot of research recently that suggests that this year labor force growth is going to be zero or close to zero. If that's the case, then you don't need any, zero is the break even for net new jobs.
For the unemployment rate not to change.
Yeah, exactly. And then for the last 3 months, it's averaged right around zero. So I'm kind of in this kind of odd spot where, like, my brain understands the math, but I can't get through my gut that this is okay.
Right.
So that was kind of one of the things that made me think.
Just to emphasize that, what you're saying is a zero doesn't seem like it's enough, but you're saying the math suggests it is enough to keep the unemployment rate unchanged.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 45 years as an economist, and if you told me zero was normal, I'd say you got to be out of your mind.
And you'd be saying the Fed needs to respond to that because there's weakness in the job market.
I mean, the idea we'd get a minus 92,000 and the Fed would go,
right,
whatever, your head would explode.
So let's talk about your general framework for thinking through a rise in the price of oil and what that would mean for policy. How much concern do you have that it bleeds into the core?
Well, that's the issue. If it's a very high level and it stays high for months on end, then at some point it bleeds through because oil is an input into so many products. This is very different than, say, a tariff on toys. You put a tariff on toys, it doesn't bleed through into all the other goods in the economy. But oil is a major intermediate import, and it will at some point bleed through. And that's where you worry about high and persistent oil shocks. It's not like a transitory goes up and then comes right back down.
What does the history tell you about what the Fed did right and what it did wrong? Obviously, Bernanke in 1986 wrote a paper that said the Fed over-responded from the 70s and the 80s and made the recession worse. At the same time, you just through a period of time here where you sort of ignored what you thought was a transitory increase in prices, and you ended up with higher and persistent inflation.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, in the 70s, people forget it wasn't a one-time oil shock. It was a sequence of oil shocks. So, if you get a bunch of one-off things, it starts looking permanent. It doesn't look like a temporary, just a few one-off things. But in responding to all that in the 70s, everybody kind of realized that maybe this was a mistake and you have to look through this stuff. And that became pretty much central bank wisdom from the 80s on, is these kind of oil price things, they go up, they come back down, you don't respond to them. I always want to point out that something where the oil goes up and then it comes down is very different than oil goes up and then stays there for a long time. That's where you get back to this issue where it bleeds through back into core inflation. And then you do have to kind of respond. You can't just look through it. So that's one of the critical things that I started thinking about. This inflation problem may be worse than I think it is if this continues. Now, we'll wait and see. We don't know where this is going to go. But we have to sort of think maybe caution is warranted. And it brings me back to one of the last points I wanted to make. In March of 22, before we were going to lift off the zero lower bound in March of 22. And I had been advocating that we should go off by 50, get off, immediately raise rates by 50 basis points. After that, Russia invades Ukraine. And everybody it's kind of the same boat as here. Caution is warranted. So don't do anything right now. And that's the same approach I took this time. It doesn't mean that I'm going to stay put for the rest of the year. I just want to wait and see where this goes. And if things go reasonably well and the labor market continues to be weak, I would start advocating again for cutting the policy rate later this year.
Walk me through the horizon of different policy outcomes that you think. the chair acknowledged that there was a discussion at the meeting of rate hikes. Where do you stand on that possibility?
Well, I think if people are worried, I'm not speaking for any of my colleagues, I'm just laying out some theoretical points. If you think inflation, say in December of 2024 was, headline PC was 2.8. It's 2.8 roughly now. So there's like no change in inflation in all that time. And if you're worried about it going up from here, then there's a sense in which people say, look, we've got to raise rates to get inflation back down and under control. I have taken the view that if it was 2.8 in December of 24 and 2.8 now, it's not structural. Because if it was structural and you believe tariffs were being passed through by 50 to 100 basis points, then inflation should be running 3.5 to 4, not 2.8. So if tariffs had any pass-through effect, then structural had to come down to maintain 2.8.
I hope people get that math. It's pretty interesting, right?
We are making progress.
You
on
added a half to 1 from tariffs.
Yep.
You had 2.8. You are 2.8. So therefore, it should be 3.5.
Something had to go down
in there. So it didn't go down. So you think that the structural inflation rate is probably more like 2 right now.
It's getting closer to 2. That's why I think once you get past the tariffs and maybe the second quarter, you're going to see inflation come back down. For just this reason, once the tariff effects wash through, then all that's left is whatever structural change. Now, if you think it's going to go bouncing way back up, but I don't think there's a need for rate hikes because of this kind of math argument I was just giving you, that we're not seeing any progress, but that's because tariffs are pushing it up while structural stuff is bringing it down, and on net it stays the same.
You and I have